February the 23rd, 2020. Guys, a quick update. They have relocated an old comet, they think, but 37 days ago they noticed this comet, which they're calling Atlas, coming in towards the inner solar system. Now, it's just outside the orbit of Mars, but it's going to loop in between Mercury and the Sun. And they're trying to trace it back. 37 days ago they found it. But they're saying now it has tripled in brightness, possibly signaling an explosion of dust and gas in the comet's core. In late May, it will swoop inside the orbit of Mercury and could become very bright indeed. We've seen this before with some of the larger comets, and I've seen quite a reaction between the Sun and the comets that get that close as far as coronal mass ejections and solar flares, things like that. Now, this is a closer-up image, but in the one before this, there was a bright object in the top right, and that's called the Owl Nebula. But they're saying Comet Atlas may be the signpost of a dying comet. Its orbit is strikingly similar to that of the Great Comet of 1844, which was visible, in broad daylight when it passed very close to the Sun in the 19th century. Comet Atlas may be a fragment of that great comet, or perhaps a sibling comet spawned by an even greater parent disintegrating 1,000+ years ago. And guys, when you got to realize it's the Earth's turning, and if we're watching this comet that's going to drop inside of Mercury, most comets you would never see because the Sun's too bright. And let's look at the JPL model on this. Again, it's as I said, a lot of comets you'll see a 6-year span or orbit. They'll go out to Jupiter somewhere in that area and come back in. But this one goes much further. It goes extremely far out into the solar system. And they're not even positive we've ever seen this one before. But they do know it's brightening, and they do that as they sense that opposite polarity of our Sun, again, electric universe. But here we are on today's date. Atlas is above the Earth, above the ecliptic of the inner solar system. Not quite yet over the orbit of Mars. We'll play the model through. And again, it's going to dive between the Sun and Mercury. That will happen, and we'll stop it as the model goes through on May the 31st. That will be the close approach to the Sun, but it should become visible much earlier than that. It's already visible on telescopes, but if it was naked eye in the daytime, if it's the same comet, then it could be quite a show. In May the 31st, notice that. It's very close to what we call the ecliptic, or the kind of the eye level of the planets in the inner solar system. Now, the Earth is slightly below the ecliptic, and that will give us, as the Earth starts tilting into summer, a little longer view of this thing as it dives. But again, the Atlas, this is going to be interesting, because even if we don't get very good naked eye images of it, the images that we'll be able to get and put into videos from the satellites, guys, is going to be amazing. And depending on the size, we'll update it. We'll determine the reaction between it and the Sun. We've seen major comets disintegrate as they have that slingshot motion around the Sun. In other words, that comet could be coming in at 1 million miles per day. But as it gets closer to the Sun, the gravity picks up, and we've seen them accelerate to 11 million miles per day. And that G-force is very damaging. But again, the arc span goes back to December 28th. You notice that? The last one has been February the 5th. And they went back and modeled 203 orbits in this 37-day period, just kind of looking at the arc, called the arc span, and trying to put it into some kind of model. So it's relatively new. But I want to look at some information of the comet they think it may be part of. Now, let's look again at the comet of 1844. And this is from the Astronomical Journal of that time. It says, the comet was first seen at the Cape of Good Hope on the 18th of December, 1844. On the day following, it was seen by Captain Wilmot, R.A., and by Mr. McClure of the Cape Observatory. In the monthly notices of the Astronomical Society, it is usually designated as Wilmot's Comet. It continued to be visible to the naked eye from the date of its discovery until the end of January, and was followed with the telescopes up to the 12th of March. So going back to December the 18th, up to the end of January, guys, you've got almost 6 weeks of naked eye visibility. at that time. And these orbits, it takes a toll on the comets. They'll break apart, but we don't have any evidence that it has. It says during the latter part of December, back then, in the first week in January, it was a brilliant object in the southern hemisphere, equaling, it is said, in brightness to the celebrated Halley's Comet. After it had ceased to be visible to the naked eye, it approached sufficiently near to the equator to become visible as a telescopic comet in the northern latitudes. It was then detected almost simultaneously by Professor Kalla on the 5th of February, by Dr. Peters and Mr. Cooper at Naples on the 7th. To this rediscovery, we owe several valuable European observations during the latter part of its course. Now, what's happening now was happening then. They said then, it says, this has a rude resemblance of its elements to those of the comet of 1556, and it induced him to test the possibility of it being the same thing by asserting whether the fine series of observations made at the Cape of Good Hope, which was at 60 degrees on the horizon, match. So what we'll do now in the upcoming videos between now and the time this thing possibly becomes naked eye visible is we'll go back and look at the history of the comet of 1844 and the comet of 1556 and just kind of get the information, guys. It's one of the things that I love more than anything as far as research, and we're watching a lot of things. So, guys, by about 7 p.m. Eastern or Central tonight, there will be new articles up on the website at BPEarthWatch.com. Check those out. They're very important. It's a heads up. Be safe.